I'm joined today by Dr. Paul Moller, president of Moller International, and also someone who has been developing a modern flying car really for some time now, Dr. Moller. When did you first start this project?
Well, I was inspired when I was five after viewing a hummingbird, but I think the project probably was seriously started when I was about 15 and attempted to build my first helicopter.
And what is the status of the project currently?
Well, the project involves many arms because we have both unmanned technologies like the drone industry, which is very popular at the moment, and we have high speed vehicles that you would use as a commuter in the future. And then we have low speed utility vehicles, much like the Jetson vehicle, that gets you from, as a utility vehicle, border patrol vehicle, rescue vehicle, one that speed is not important, but utility is. So I would say we have a number of different projects. And certainly one of the most important is that we're into engines of a unique nature. These engines really make everything else we do possible. These are what we call a rotor power rotary engine. Power being the big issue, as it is with the hummingbird. When you think about it, the hummingbird apparently can consume its own weight in a single day. Taking off vertically does require a great deal of power, and that's really been the problem historically as to why you don't have a flying car in your garage at the moment.
Yeah, and there have been different people, including engineering experts and aeronautical experts, who have weighed in on your project, and they said, we don't know that this is really possible the way Dr. Paul Moller is approaching this. I'm sure you've heard those detractors. What's the current status? Is there a prototype? At what point in the process are you?
Well, we've demonstrated all of our technologies repeatedly. So we've done something that no one else has done. We've actually flown them. I've flown them personally. Uh, we've never felt comfortable enough to go out there and make an excessive public display. Certainly, we've had press people present in some of our flights, but we want or we're waiting for the ability to do an international press flight where we have a level of confidence in the all the security methods that we've employed to make this safe. And we're working very hard at that at the moment. Multiple levels of redundancy on all components so that when we get in front of the public, uh, there's not a catastrophe because this technology is very unforgiving. When something goes wrong in an airplane, you usually have the capability of gliding to the ground. Certainly a fairly reasonable capacity to survive, but a vertical takeoff aircraft during the hover mode, like the helicopter below 200 feet when it's hovering, there is no recovery. So we do it through redundancy. We do it through multiple engines, multiple computers, multiple fuel tanks, multiple fuel pumps, everything that you can ask for. We have multiple elements. This is a uh, this is a complicated system in itself, but it ends up being a very reliable system.
And if people want to take a look at images of what we're discussing, just Google the Moller Skycar, Moller. Talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned that it uses a rotary engine. What would the top speed of this vehicle be when flying through the air?
Well, I'll always refer to two different vehicles: the Skycar being the more streamlined, high-speed, certainly more expensive vehicle if one were to buy it, and then the lower speed vehicle, which we call the New Era. The Skycar has a top speed of roughly 300 miles an hour at 25,000 feet. Clearly, we have not flown there yet, but we've flown it in wind tunnels. We've flown it on computers. We know that we have the capacity to do that. And then the other vehicle, which never goes faster than 100 miles an hour, but is something that everybody can use, a rancher, a border patrol, any paramilitary application, any recreational application. Uh, these two vehicles fit two different roles, both I think, which are going to be a big part of the future.
What's the highest that you've actually flown the prototype?
Well, high enough to kill myself. That much I can say, but probably not in excess of 100 feet. Uh, Anything above 10 feet becomes very dangerous. So, again, uh, probably I'm dealing in a very risky world, but I went after it many years ago, and I think it's a little late to change my path.
And why do you think that this has been such a long process? As you said, and as I've read, you've been on this path for about 50 years. we've been hearing about this sort of amorphous idea of flying cars for a long time. 100 years ago, people thought by the year 2000 we might have flying cars. Why has it been such a long path for you?
Well, it's a long path for anybody. And again, I emphasize the requirement for the power plant is very unique. Uh, you need to be able to produce at least 2 horsepower per pound. Right now, we're producing 3 horsepower per pound. We need 1,200 horsepower in a 2,400 pound vehicle. Try to try to think of that possibility. Now, if you go to very large rotors like a helicopter, you cheat really. And of
Now,
course, it's
I don't mean
very
to interrupt, Dr. Moeller, but I want to make sure we're clear on the numbers. You said you need to produce 2 horsepower per pound, and then said you needed to produce 1,200 in a 2,400 pound vehicle. But don't you mean 4,800 in a 2,400 pound vehicle?
no, I mean 1,200 horsepower in a 2,400 pound vehicle. Our engines, in effect, weigh 600 pounds, and they weigh about a third of the weight of the vehicle. Actually, we do better than that now that we've gone above that. But the bottom line is, you don't have any engines that, other than our engine or perhaps a similar engine, if someone chooses to develop it, that makes it possible to get these kind of power levels in a reliable package. The rotary engine, which is fundamentally what we're talking about, the same kind of engine in a way, at least from the family of the engines used in the Mazda, has the ability to produce a huge amount of power in a small package. It gets into the region of what the turbine can do, but the turbine engine is a very expensive engine. It'll always be an order of magnitude more expensive than the engines we're using. So economic standards into this. Certainly you see the military flying vertical takeoff aircraft all the time. You could call them flying cars if you like. I'm certain they could produce what's called a flying car, but they would also have an engine that costs $1 million. That's really the problem. How do you get this high amount of power in a lightweight package and not have it cost so much that it never would be available to the public in any reasonable way?
And what do you think that one of these flying cars would need to cost for it to be sort of economically viable as a transportation method for, not necessarily the average American, but even upper middle class?
Well, I think that it would have a very substantial market at $100,000, but I think it's possible, and I'm sure we can show that in economic production levels similar to that of a single model of the automobile industry, which in the case of the Mustang, for example, was 250,000 vehicles a year, we would certainly be in the area of 50,000. I don't think there's any issue about that because the only real cost to our vehicle is the engine. Uh, our control system is so very simple because the engine does all the controls. So that's really the bottom line: is the engines determine the cost. And right now we're in the engine business even more than we're in the aircraft business because we have conditional orders for $5 billion of engines. And if we can produce engines of high volume, economy of scale means the Skycar is going to be inexpensive. It's the driving force behind everything: safety and cost.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about safety. I mean, in reading about the sort of viability of the consumer flying car, it seems safety, cost, and the impact of weather. We're not talking about a commercial airliner with ILS and instrument navigation systems necessarily, are we? Weather would be a big factor.
Well, I think that you've got to consider that this vehicle will basically be flown automatically at all times in an environment where there's a lot of other vehicles. So you'll be in the highway in the sky with virtual highway. As you probably know, the airliners are landed more often than not by automatic landing today. In fact, the failures have typically been when it's manually controlled. The automatic landings by commercial airlines has been far more successful than the manual landings. So we're in a world where automation is far safer than the human in terms of the reliability. Consistency, perhaps, is a better way to put it. And so, yes, you'll get in this vehicle, you'll drive it. And when I say drive it, I mean it's streetable. You drive it to a vertiport or a heliport, as it's called today. You code in your destination and you go to sleep, you read, you play computer games, whatever you choose to do on the way. You can rearrange somewhere along the line to go to a different destination, but you certainly are not going to be at the controls. And there's no reason for you. It's far, far safer for it to be all programmed in the first place.
Last thing on this, as fascinating as this is, how far away do you think in terms of a timeline we are right now?
Well, it depends what level of vision you have as what you consider this becoming a commonplace vehicle. Uh, we have the opportunity to have this aircraft approved under new categories that didn't even exist a number of years ago, which make it easy to get to market. As you know, the drone industry is now allowed to fly up to 400 feet. And if you let people fly around without somebody on board at 400 feet, you certainly can let them fly around at 400 feet with somebody on board without a pilot's license and without FAA certification. So that's a big step. The next step beyond that's what's called light sports aviation category, a special subcategory for power lift, which our vehicle is, and that you can fly to 8,500 feet. And of course, the final category is FAA certified, where we can fly to 25,000. So you have various entry points, and that's very important. Getting access to this market in a way that makes anybody a candidate to use this vehicle is very, very important and critical to the success. So when I answer your question, next year we will have vehicles on the market. They will cost between 250,000 to 350,000 because they're basically hand built at this time. But Boeing has studied this vehicle, and many other aerospace companies have looked at it. And I think there's a consensus that in the volumes of 100,000, 200,000 vehicles, which is small relative to the auto industry, it'll be down around $50,000.
Truly fascinating. We've been speaking with Dr. Paul Moller. Moller International is the company, and you can Google the Moller Skycar. Thank you so much for being on with us.